Something happened in the skies over the Middle East that has every major military power on the planet quietly reassessing its playbook. Radar systems lit up, satellite feeds shifted, and intelligence analysts who had been tracking Iranian military movements for months suddenly found themselves staring at data that confirmed what many had feared was only a matter of time. Iran had just fired a new ballistic missile. This was not a test in the traditional sense of a quiet, controlled launch out over open water, but a bold, calculated demonstration of reach, precision, and defiance. The shockwaves from that single event are still moving through defense ministries, from Tel Aviv to Riyadh to Washington. This is not background noise. This is not routine. What you're about to hear changes the strategic map of the Middle East in ways that most mainstream coverage is not taking the time to explain. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what Iran just proved, who it was aimed at, and why the next few weeks could determine whether this remains a military flex or the opening move in something far more dangerous. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, announced the successful test of what state media described as a new generation ballistic missile with significantly improved range and terminal accuracy. Range refers to how far it can travel, while terminal accuracy indicates how precisely it can hit a target at the end of its journey. Both of those factors together represent the two things that make a missile genuinely threatening, rather than just symbolically alarming. For years, Iran's missile arsenal was viewed by Western analysts as powerful but imprecise, capable of hitting a general area, but not necessarily the specific target inside that area. That distinction matters enormously in modern warfare. What Iran appears to be signaling with this latest test is that the gap is closing, and that changes everything. To understand why this test is so significant, you have to go back several years and trace the arc of Iran's missile program. After the 2015 nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, there was a brief window of diplomatic optimism. However, even during that period, Iran never stopped developing its missile capabilities. That was always the program's blind spot. The deal addressed nuclear enrichment, but largely left Iran's ballistic missile development untouched. When the United States withdrew from the agreement in 2018 under the Trump administration and reimposed sweeping sanctions, Iran responded not with restraint, but with acceleration. Missile tests became more frequent, more public, and more sophisticated. Each one was a message. Each one provided data. The missile tested in this latest launch is believed by regional analysts to fall within the class of medium to intermediate range ballistic missiles, potentially capable of reaching targets well beyond Iran's immediate neighborhood. When you look at a map and draw that radius, the list of potential targets it encompasses reads like a who's who of American military infrastructure in the region. Bases in Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and beyond. It also puts Israel firmly within range, a fact that Israeli defense officials have acknowledged publicly and privately for years, but which carries new weight now that the precision question is being answered. Israel's missile defense system, one of the most advanced anti-ballistic missile platforms in the world, was specifically designed and continually upgraded to address exactly this kind of threat. However, this is where the strategic calculus gets complicated. No missile defense system is perfect. Even the best systems operate on probability. They raise the cost of an attack and complicate the math for an adversary, but they do not guarantee a perfect intercept rate. When you're talking about a large-scale, coordinated barrage of missiles with improved accuracy, defense systems face the problem of saturation. Iran knows this and has studied it. The entire architecture of their deterrent strategy is built around it. What makes this moment different from previous Iranian missile tests is the timing and the context. The broader Middle East has been operating under elevated tension since the conflict in Gaza intensified, with Iran-backed proxy groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various factions in Iraq and Syria, all operating at heightened levels of activity. Iran has described this network as an axis of resistance, a coordinated constellation of aligned forces that can threaten multiple fronts simultaneously. The missile test, from Tehran's perspective, serves as the capstone of that message. It says, "We are not just a network of proxies, we are the center of gravity, and we have the weapons to back it up." Saudi Arabia, for its part, has been watching this development with deep unease. The kingdom spent years under Houthi drone and missile attacks before a fragile ceasefire shifted the tempo of that conflict. The Saudis know better than almost anyone what it feels like when Iranian-linked forces use missiles as a tool of strategic pressure. The new test renews questions about whether the regional security arrangements currently in place are sufficient, and whether the Abraham Accords, which brought several Arab states into formal diplomatic and security cooperation with Israel, represent a durable realignment or fragile framework that new Iranian capabilities could destabilize. From Washington's perspective, the timing is also sensitive. The United States has been engaged in a complex diplomatic dance around the Iranian nuclear file once again, with indirect negotiations ongoing through intermediaries. A dramatic missile test in the middle of that process is a double signal. part defiance directed at American pressure and part leverage in potential negotiations. Iran has used this playbook before. Military demonstrations timed to diplomatic moments are a feature, not a bug, of Tehran's foreign policy strategy. The question American policymakers are asking is whether to respond with more pressure, which risks accelerating the very behavior they are trying to contain, or to treat this as a bargaining chip in the negotiating process. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, and the tens of thousands of American military personnel stationed across the Gulf region are a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Aircraft carrier strike groups in the region represent both a deterrent and a potential target. Iranian military doctrine has for years focused on asymmetric warfare, the idea that a weaker conventional military can still impose unacceptable costs on a stronger adversary by targeting its most valuable and vulnerable assets. A more accurate, long-range ballistic missile changes the risk profile of every American installation within that radius. There is another dimension to this story involving the global weapons pipeline. Iran has been increasingly intertwined with Russia's military operations in Ukraine, supplying Shahed drones that have become a weapon of strategic choice for Russian forces attacking Ukrainian infrastructure. In exchange, there are credible reports and intelligence assessments suggesting Russia has shared advanced military technology with Iran, potentially including guidance systems and propulsion technology that could directly improve exactly the kind of missile accuracy we are now seeing demonstrated. If that exchange is real, then this missile test is not just a bilateral Middle East story. It is a chapter in a much larger narrative about how authoritarian states are sharing military technology to counter Western influence globally. China, too, has maintained deep economic relationships with Iran, despite international sanctions pressure. Beijing has never been a vocal defender of Iranian missile development, but it has consistently opposed the kind of maximum pressure campaigns that would impose serious economic pain on Tehran. China's calculation is partly about oil supply, partly about using Iran as a geopolitical counterweight to American influence in a critical region, and partly about the principle that the United States should not be able to unilaterally dictate the strategic choices of other sovereign nations. That position, regardless of how one evaluates it, creates a structural environment in which Iran faces less external constraint than it otherwise might. What happens next is genuinely uncertain. The most likely short-term outcome is a period of heightened diplomatic signaling, public statements, back-channel communications, and a round of emergency consultations among American allies in the region. Israel will almost certainly use this moment to press for stronger commitments from Washington on Iranian containment, particularly as it relates to nuclear red lines. Gulf states will recalibrate their defense procurement priorities, and there will be renewed conversations about deeper integration between American and regional missile defense systems. Iran will watch all of this closely and draw its own conclusions about whether the test achieved its desired deterrent effect. The longer-term question is whether deterrence holds. The entire logic of deterrence is based on the idea that each side believes the cost of aggression is too high to bear. For decades, that logic has prevented a direct war between Iran and the United States or Israel. However, deterrence is not a static condition. It is a dynamic equilibrium that shifts every time one side changes its capabilities or its willingness to absorb risk. A more accurate Iranian missile does not automatically break deterrence, but it changes the math at the margins. And in geopolitics, margins are where wars start. We are living through a period of extraordinary strategic volatility. The old rules of regional order are under pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. What Iran demonstrated with this missile test is that it intends to be a defining force in whatever new order emerges. Whether that leads to escalation, negotiation, or an uncomfortable new status quo will depend on decisions made in the coming weeks by leaders in Tehran, Washington, Tel Aviv, and Riyadh. Leaders operating with incomplete information, competing domestic pressures, and the full weight of historical consequence bearing down on every move. If you want a full picture of what is happening in the Middle East, consider the strategic implications beyond the headlines. What do you think Iran's endgame actually is? And are the United States and its allies prepared for what comes next? We will continue to bring you analysis that cuts through the noise. Stay alert.